Hey there, biology. Today we're going to go ahead and discuss chapter 9.1 and 9.2, cellular respiration. When you see the information or when you see little boxes that pop up that say write this down, make sure that you get this down and you put it in your notes so you'll get points for watching the video. Okay, so cellular respiration. We've already reviewed these terms, but we know that autotrophs use energy from sunlight or chemicals to make their own food. So in last chapter, we talked about green plants using photosynthesis to trap energy from the sunlight in order to make sugar or glucose. So in this chapter, we'll actually learn how this glucose is then broken down by organisms and the energy is stored as ATP in a process called cellular respiration. So what kind of organisms go through cellular respiration? Well, plants go through cellular respiration. Yes, they go through photosynthesis, but that's just to capture the sun's energy so that they can turn it into food, but then they have to break the food down. So plants do go through cellular respiration. Fungi, animals, that's including you and me, and then bacteria. So all living things need energy, and so all living things will go through cellular respiration, the process of breaking down sugars. So how do we get sugar from plants? Well, if you remember, there are heterotrophs, and heterotrophs get their energy by eating other organisms. So we get energy from plants or animals that have eaten plants. So if you remember from cell bio, so these are the organelles that are important for cellular respiration. The area with gel-like material in cell membrane, which surrounds the mitochondria, we say is the cytoplasm. So it's like the jelly fluid that kind of fills in all the spaces of the between organelles. And then the power plant of the cell that burns the glucose and stores energy as ATP is our mitochondria. So here's the first thing that we're going to have to start writing down. You have to know the different parts of a mitochondria because each different part is important for the different parts of cellular respiration. So mitochondria is the cell power plant. It's surrounded by a double membrane. We have the outer membrane and we have an inner membrane. And we call the inner membrane the cristae. Now if you notice, the cristae is really crazy folded. And the more folded it is, the better, because we want to create as much surface area as possible. The more surface area, the more reactions the mitochondria can go through. The space between the inner membrane and the outer membrane, so if you look here, this space, if you follow my mouse here, we call that the intermembrane space, which makes sense. Inter, like you can think inside the membrane space. And then we have space inside the cristae fold. So that's just basically on the very inside of the inner membrane. So in between here, we call that the matrix. And then overall, the cytoplasm just surrounds the mitochondria. So all organisms, heterotrophs and autotrophs, use energy to ATP, taking as ATP. This process of releasing the energy from food or glucose to make ATP, again, we call cellular respiration. Obviously, an important term. So cellular respiration actually has to happen slowly in many steps. If all the energy was released in one step, we were to break it down at once, most of that energy would be lost as light and as heat, and that's what we don't want. That's inefficient. So if you remember the photosynthesis equation, the cellular respiration equation is going to be super simple for you. So we know that photosynthesis is 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus energy equals C6H12O6 plus 6 O2. Okay, so if you know that equation, you know the cellular respiration equation because it's the exact opposite. So we have our sugar. We have our C6H12O6 plus 6O2. So the way to think about it, what can plants give to us? Okay, so that's the reactants. Okay, we then produce 6 CO2. What can we give to plants? Well, we can give them carbon dioxide. We also can feed them. They always need to they need to be watered. So we give them 6 H2O and energy. Okay, so that's what comes out of cellular respiration. And so the two equations are the exact opposite. If you memorized it last chapter, you have it down for this chapter because it's just flipped. So remember from photosynthesis, we had high energy electron carriers, where that was the NADP+. Okay, and that turned into NADPH. Cellular respiration also uses the same thing. It uses high energy carriers, and they are NAD+ and FAD. So NAD+ plus 2 electrons and 2 hydrogen ions we call NADH. FAD plus 2 electrons and 2 hydrogen ions we call FADH2. Okay, so those are our electron carriers that are needed for this reaction. So the first step of cellular respiration we call glycolysis. And you need to know the order of these steps. You need to know where they happen. And I will give you diagrams to help you with this. So glycolysis is going to happen in the cytoplasm right outside of the mitochondria. So glycolysis, the glycose equals sweet, so you can think of sugar. The lysis means to split apart or break down. So glycolysis does not require oxygen, but it does need some energy to get started. What molecule do you think is going to supply that energy? So what energy molecule have we been talking about? Hopefully you tell me ATP. So glycolysis. In glycolysis, so think about it, we have our sweet breaking down. So we have to start off with our sugar. So we start off with our sugar, and we start off with 2 ATP molecules. Using that ATP molecules, we break the bonds in glucose, and we break them down into 2 3-carbon molecules. And we call those pyruvic acid. So we break glucose into 2 pyruvic acid molecules, so 2 3-carbon molecules. From that, we put in 2 ATP molecules, but we get back 4 ATP molecules. So we have a net gain of 2 ATP and a net gain of 2 NADH. So we have to spend money to get more money back. Okay, so that's the gist of glycolysis. And then we also have the NADH. Okay, so after pyruvic acid is made and the NADH is made, there are 2 directions in which it can go, and it all depends on the atmosphere it's in. So if there is oxygen present or if there's no oxygen present. If there's no oxygen present, we call that an anaerobic process. So anaerobic, you can think "and," if that's ever in front of a word, it means not happening. Aerobic, you can kind of hear air in it, so you can think of no air or no oxygen. If there's no oxygen present, you're going to go through fermentation. If there is oxygen present, which we call aerobic, so aerobic, you can think air is there, you're going to go through cellular respiration, so through the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. Pyruvic acid without oxygen is going to go through fermentation, and there's 2 types of fermentation. There's alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Depending on the organism will determine the type of fermentation it goes through. So in alcoholic fermentation, pyruvic acid plus NADH from glycolysis are turned into alcohol, carbon dioxide, and NAD+. And this happens when yeast makes bread dough rise, so CO2 bubbles make air spaces in the bread, and then the alcohol eventually cooks out during cooking. So that's why our bread doesn't taste like alcohol. It also happens when yeast is used to make beer, or when bacteria is used to make wine. Then we can go through lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation uses pyruvic acid, NADH, just like before, to turn that into lactic acid and NAD+. And that happens in your muscles during exercise when the body can't get oxygen to tissues fast enough. So when your muscles are feeling sore, that's the lactic acid building up in your body. Okay, this also is going to happen when we make foods and beverages. So things like yogurt, buttermilk, sauerkraut, yum, pickles, cheese, sour cream, kimchi, all of that. So lastly, why do we go through fermentation anyways if in the end of glycolysis we gain ATP? We gain a net of 2 ATP molecules, which is the energy currency we need. Well, without oxygen, pyruvic acid is going to build up, and all the NAD plus carriers are eventually going to get full. And without the NAD plus carriers, we can't go through glycolysis because they're needed to pick up some of the electrons and hydrogen ions from when glucose is broken down. So in the end, when we go through fermentation, either or, alcohol or lactic acid, we're making that NAD+, and you get the NAD+ carriers back. So fermentation basically happens to regenerate the NAD+, needed for glycolysis or to keep glycolysis going. Okay guys, so that's the end of 9.1. What I would like you to do is go ahead and answer these 6 questions in your notebook. All you have to do is answer them, make sure you write in complete sentences, and if you have to draw pictures, don't worry about obviously writing in sentences. Alright, I expect it done for tomorrow.